The dog came in first. That was the thing nobody seemed to understand later, when everything fell apart and the lawyers got involved, and the hospital board called it a protocol violation. The dog came in first, not the handler, not the paperwork, not a veterinary referral or a signed authorization form. Just a 110-pound Belgian Malinois named Brix, dragged through the sliding doors of Mercy General's emergency entrance by a sergeant named Callum Day, who was bleeding from his left shoulder and could barely stand. And the dog was worse. Brix had shrapnel in his chest. Not metaphorically. Not the kind of thing you write about in a military press release to make people feel something. Actual metal fragments from an IED that had gone off during a training exercise at Fort Bellows, 40 minutes outside of Harlow, Oregon. And somehow, through traffic, through the September rain, through Day's refusal to stop at the base infirmary, because their vet was 3 hours away at a conference in Portland, they had ended up here, in the lobby of a civilian hospital. Tatum Reese was the charge nurse on duty. She was 31 years old, 8 months out from a divorce she hadn't asked for, and working a double because Kenji had called in sick again and nobody else would cover the Thursday overnight. She had a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand and a clipboard under her arm, and she was walking toward Bay 4 when the automatic doors opened and the dog collapsed on the floor 6 feet in front of her. She stopped. Sergeant Day looked up at her. His face was gray under the fluorescent light. There was a tourniquet on his left arm that someone, maybe him, maybe one of his unit, she couldn't tell, had applied above the elbow, and it was done correctly, which told her something about him before he ever said a word. "He took the blast," Day said. His voice was flat, in the way that voices go flat when someone is managing pain with everything they have. "He pushed me out of the way, and he took most of it. Please." Tatum looked at the dog. Brix was breathing. Shallow. Fast. The kind of breathing that meant something was pressing on his lungs. Vest was still on. She could see the entry points through the side panel. Small, dark, already crusting. His gums were pale. She set down her coffee. "Get me a gurney," she said, to no one in particular and to everyone in the hallway at once. "And someone start a line on this man. Left arm below the tourniquet. Be careful, ma'am." The voice came from behind her. She turned. Denise Olson, the night supervisor, was standing at the nursing station with both hands flat on the counter. She had the expression on her face that Tatum had come to recognize over 14 months at Mercy General, the one that meant someone was about to tell her what she already knew and had already decided to disregard. "That's an animal," Olson said. "I can see that. We don't treat animals here. This is a human medical facility. There's a 24-hour emergency vet clinic on Route 9. He'll be dead before we get there." Tatum was already on her knees. She pressed 2 fingers against Brix's inner thigh, feeling for a femoral pulse. It was there, weak but there. His lung is compromised, probably hemothorax. He needs a chest drain. "Tatum," Olson's voice dropped, "I'm telling you right now as your supervisor. I heard you." She looked up. "Get me gloves. Large. And I need a thoracostomy kit, the 28 French, and someone find me a vet or a vet tech, or anyone who's worked with large animal trauma, because I have not, and I'm going to need guidance." The hallway went very quiet. Then a resident named Marcus. She could never remember his last name, always just Marcus, always in that blue fleece under his white coat, said, "I did a summer rotation at the Oregon State Vet School and moved toward the supply room." That was how it started. What happened in the next 40 minutes, Tatum could only remember in pieces, the way you remember any high-focus emergency. Not as a continuous narrative, but as a series of still images, each one hyper-detailed and surrounded by blur. The weight of Brix's ribs under her palms as she worked. The sound Sergeant Day made when they finally got him into Bay 3 and started cleaning his shoulder. Not a cry, just a low, controlled exhale. The sound of a man who had been trained not to make noise and was honoring that training even now. Marcus narrating from memory everything he recalled about canine thoracic anatomy. A technician named Prue holding the oxygen mask over Brix's muzzle and talking to him the whole time, saying his name, saying good boy, saying stay with me, in the same calm voice she used with human patients, because it was the right instinct. The shrapnel, 3 fragments, the largest the size of a thumbnail, was not something they could remove in that bay. What they could do was drain the blood that had accumulated in the pleural space get Bricks's lung re-expanded, stabilize his pressure, and buy him the time he needed to get to someone who could actually do the surgery. By the time Tatum straightened up and pulled off her gloves, Bricks was breathing easier. His color was coming back. He had lifted his head once, found Day's voice through the wall between the bays, and let it back down. She threw the gloves in the bin and went to wash her hands. Olson was waiting for her outside the scrub sink. "My office," she said. Now. The office was small and aggressively tidy. Olson had a framed needlepoint on the wall that said "Led with Purpose" and a philodendron that was doing better than any of them deserved. She sat behind her desk with her hands folded and her expression arranged into something she probably thought looked like regret. "You put this hospital at significant legal risk," she said. Tatum had not sat down. She stood with her back against the door because there was nowhere else to stand and because she was still in the decompression phase. Her hands had that faint tremor they always got after an adrenaline drop, and she wanted to be able to feel the solid wood behind her. "He would have died," she said. "That is not your call to make. That is not within the scope of your license, your authority, or your role at this facility. You used hospital equipment, hospital supplies, and hospital staff time to treat a non-human patient without authorization, without veterinary oversight, and without consent from administration." Day consented. "He's the handler. He's not authorized to consent on behalf of this hospital." Tatum looked at her. "Olson, the dog saved his life. He pushed his handler out of the way of an IED. He's a military working dog, not a pet. He has a service record." Olson's expression didn't change. "That doesn't alter the legal framework we operate within. What does it alter then? What would have had to be different for you to say yes? If I'd had time to call you first, would you have said yes?" A pause. Very small. The kind that answers the question without words. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a conduct review," Olson said. "Effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your badge to security before you leave the building." Tatum stood there for a moment. She thought about saying several things. She thought about the 14 months she had given to this floor, the doubles she had covered, the patients she had stayed late for, the new grads she had oriented because there was no one else available and she couldn't leave them to drown. She thought about Bricks on that floor with his pale gums and his shallow breathing and the way his ear had moved when he heard Dai's voice. She didn't say any of it. "Okay," she said. She turned around and opened the door. Security, one guard, a quiet man named Foster who looked mortified and kept apologizing under his breath, walked her to her locker and waited in the hallway while she gathered her things. She had a gym bag she kept on the top shelf with a spare set of clothes. She had a water bottle with a dent in the side from the time she'd dropped it running to a code. She had a photograph tucked into the locker door of her and her sister at the coast last August, both of them squinting into the sun. She took all of it. Foster walked her to the parking garage. He didn't try to make conversation. She was grateful for that. She sat in her car for 11 minutes before she started the engine, not crying exactly, just sitting. The rain had started up again, and it was loud on the roof, and she let it be loud while she figured out what shape her life was now. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Marcus. A text from Prue. "Bricks is stable. The transport vet is on her way from Portland. He's going to make it." She put the phone face down on the passenger seat. Then she drove home. She lived in a rented house in the Eastfield neighborhood, 20 minutes from the hospital, on a street that had one working streetlight and a neighbor with wind chimes that were technically in violation of the city noise ordinance, but who was going to call? The house was small, and it smelled like the candles she burned because she'd read somewhere that scent was good for grief, and she'd been in some version of grief for the better part of 2 years now. First the marriage, then the miscarriage nobody knew about, then the slow creep of understanding that the life she'd thought she was building had turned out to be something different. She was good at her job. She had been certain of that, at least. It was the one thing that hadn't moved. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of tea she didn't drink, and her laptop open to nothing in particular, and she thought about what to do next. Call a lawyer, call her union rep, call her sister, call no one, and just wait and see what the conduct review looked like. She was still sitting there at 10 in the morning when someone knocked on her front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She tightened the belt of her robe. She'd changed out of her scrubs the moment she got home. That much she'd done on autopilot, and went to the door and looked through the peephole. There were 2 men on her porch. Both of them were in uniform, not hospital scrubs, not any kind of civilian uniform, the kind with insignia, the kind she recognized from the news and from photos and from a particular quality of posture that you either had or you didn't. She opened the door. The taller one spoke first. He had a face that looked like it had been weathered by something other than weather, and he held his cover under his arm, which she vaguely remembered meant something respect, formality. She couldn't place the exact protocol. "Mrs. Reese?" he said. "Yes. I'm Lieutenant Commander Elias Ford, Naval Special Warfare Command. This is Senior Chief Petty Officer Del Ashmore." He indicated the man beside him, shorter, broader, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like he was always calculating something. "We'd like to speak with you if you have a few minutes." She looked at them both. She was aware that she was standing in her doorway in a bathrobe at 10 in the morning after being fired 6 hours ago, and for some reason that detail, the bathrobe specifically, was the thing her brain kept catching on. "About bricks," she said. Something shifted in Ford's expression. "May we come in?" They sat at her kitchen table, and she made more tea because it gave her something to do with her hands, and Fordy explained. Bricks, she learned his full designation was MWD Bricks K-117, was assigned to a joint task force that Ford was not at liberty to describe in full, other than to say that the unit's operations had taken them to 5 countries in the last 2 years, and that Bricks had been on 19 of those deployments and had twice detected explosive devices that would have killed the men around him. He had a service record that was, Ford said quietly, exceptional by any standard. Sergeant Callum Day had been his handler for 3 years. Day was currently in recovery at Mercy General, stable, expected to retain full function of his arm. He had, Ford said, been extremely clear with his debrief team about what had happened at the hospital, both what Tatum had done and what had happened after. Ashmore, who had not spoken yet, set a folder on the table. She looked at it. "We became aware of your termination at approximately 0400, Ford said. A complaint was also filed with the Oregon State Board of Nursing this morning, alleging conduct unbecoming and misuse of hospital resources. We wanted to speak with you before that process moved any further." Tatum pulled the folder toward her and opened it without asking permission. It was a written statement from Day. Single-spaced, 4 pages, formal in structure but not in language. It read the way someone talks when they are very tired and very precise about wanting the truth recorded correctly. He described the moment of the blast. He described the decision to drive to Mercy General. He described Tatum Reese kneeling on the hospital floor and what happened in the 40 minutes after that. The last paragraph said, if she had not acted, Bricks would not have survived transport to an appropriate veterinary facility. I am certain of this. Whatever decision she made about protocol, she made the right call. I want that on record. She closed the folder. "What does this mean?" she said, in practical terms. Ford looked at Ashmore. Some kind of silent exchange she couldn't parse. "Military working dogs are government property," Ford said. "Their care falls under a specific legal framework. What you did last night, technically, you rendered emergency aid to government property, which is a different legal category than treating a civilian animal without authorization." He paused. "Our JAG office has been in contact with the hospital's legal counsel this morning, and they've been informed that pursuing disciplinary action against you for the care you rendered to Bricks would be," he seemed to choose the word carefully, "inadvisable. Given the circumstances, given the legal framework, and given the fact that the alternative outcome would have involved the loss of a decorated military asset while his handler attempted to access care at a civilian medical facility that turned him away." Tatum stared at him. "They didn't turn him away," she said. "They turned Bricks away. Day got treated." "Yes," Ford said. "That distinction is part of the conversation our JAG office is having with their counsel." Ashmore spoke for the first time. His voice was lower than she'd expected, almost gentle. "What Lieutenant Commander Ford is saying, Ms. Reese, is that the hospital is going to have a harder time explaining why they terminated a nurse for providing emergency care to a military working dog than you're going to have defending the decision to provide it." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped. A pale fall light was coming through the kitchen window and hitting the corner of her table where the mug was, and she noticed absurdly that the tea had gone cold again. What about the Board of Nursing complaint? She said. Our legal team will provide a formal statement to the board regarding the circumstances and the nature of the patient involved, Ford said. We cannot guarantee an outcome, but we can ensure the record is accurate. She nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Did Callum Day ask you to come here? Another exchange of glances. This one smaller. He asked. Ford said if there was anything we could do. She was reinstated 12 days later. The letter from Mercy General's administration was formal and brief and used the phrase upon further review 3 times in 2 paragraphs, which she found almost funny. The Board of Nursing closed the complaint without action. The hospital's legal counsel, she learned later from her union rep, had spent approximately 1 hour on a call with a Naval JAG officer before recommending to the board that the termination be reversed. Olson was still there. That was the part that didn't resolve neatly, the part that real life doesn't fix the way stories fix things. Olson was still the night supervisor, still in her tidy office with her lead with purpose needlepoint, and Tatum still worked under her on Thursday overnights. But something had changed in the weight of that. Day came to find her on her 3rd day back. He was in a sling, walking carefully, and he looked like someone who had recently made peace with something. He stopped at the nursing station and asked for her by name, and when she came around the corner and saw him standing there, she stopped walking because she didn't quite know what she was supposed to do with the feeling that moved through her. He looked at her for a moment. He's going to be okay, he said. The surgery went well. They got all of it out. He's in recovery in Portland, and the surgeon said he should be back to full duty in about 4 months. She exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding that. I'm glad, she said. He reached into the pocket of his jacket with his good arm and held something out. It was a photograph, slightly creased, like it had been carried for a while. Bricks in tactical gear, sitting at attention beside someone in full kit. She couldn't see the face under the helmet, but the posture next to the dog was Day's, unmistakably. They were somewhere dry and pale and flat, and the light had that particular bleached quality of somewhere far away. You can keep that, he said. If you want. She took it carefully. How'd you end up in Harlow? She said. The exercise, I mean. Fort Bellows is a long way from where you're based. He smiled very slightly. Long story. I've got time, she said. I'm on shift until 7. He looked at her. Something in his expression that she couldn't quite name, not flirtation, not gratitude, something more complicated than either. I know a decent diner about a mile from here, he said. If you want to hear it, I'll meet you at 7:15, she said. She tucked the photograph into the pocket of her scrub top, next to her stethoscope. She went back to work. Later, weeks later, when her sister asked how she was doing and whether the job still felt worth it, Tatum would try to explain it. Not the reinstatement, not the logistics of what the Navy had done or how the legal language had worked out in her favor. Just the moment. The one on the floor, when Bricks had first come in and the choice had been in front of her, clear and simple and unmistakable, even knowing what would follow. She'd known, even then, not that it would be okay, not that anyone would show up to set things right, just that there was only one thing she could do and still be herself at the end of it. Her sister had listened, and then said, "So you'd do it again." It wasn't a question. Tatum thought about Bricks's pale gums, the tremor in his breathing, the way Day had said please like it was the only word he had left. "Yeah," she said, "I'd do it again."